Here's why I moved back to the UK, and only 5% of it had something to do with Eurovision. Hello everyone, I am back and I am here to make videos again after a little bit of a hiatus, but there is a genuine reason for that break in making content and making YouTube videos, and that is because of, well, something that's going to be very apparent as we go through this video. Why I moved back to the UK from Vancouver, Canada, and why I might not stay in the UK. Please ignore the weird camera setup. I've been back in the UK now for, I want to say, around 20 days or so, and I'm still kind of unpacking, getting everything in order in the house that I'm living in, so I can't actually find my camera tripod. So I've placed this on a window, which has nice lighting, but the framing probably isn't the best, so please bear with. I'm really fortunate that when I moved back to the UK, I was able to move back in with my parents, and actually I moved back to a brand new, completely new area of Wales. I'm from Wales originally, but right now I'm staying in a different part of Wales because whilst I was living in Canada, my parents moved house and they moved to a brand new area. That's kind of fun, that's kind of exciting. When I was planning to move back from Canada to the UK, I had all sorts of feelings, but I didn't really feel too badly about moving back to the UK because I was considering what life was like in Vancouver and comparing it to that, but also because I wasn't returning to the same thing. I was returning to something new and something exciting, and I saw it as an opportunity to kind of explore a new area and enjoy a different way of life for a little bit and kind of learn to go with the flow and learn to not have everything planned out and not have everything ready. Because one thing that I learned when I moved to Vancouver is you can't plan these things, and life will take you in a different direction and things will happen, and it's all part of life. So I'm just kind of going with the flow at the minute. I'm in my just go with it era. Whilst it's still too early to really talk about how it feels to be back in the UK, I do feel like I'm able to share some sort of insight into moving back to the UK and why I did it, and the beginning of what it feels like to be back in the UK. For those who have subscribed and watched for Canada content, you should also know that I will be sharing book content going forwards, as well as living in the UK and other travel related content, so just bear with. If you know somebody who likes book content as well, then let them know to come to this channel. And bonus points if they like books and they're thinking about moving to Canada, because I cover it both. So let's start with why I moved back to the UK. Living in Vancouver was insanely expensive, and the cost of living there was really bad, really atrocious, and was a major factor in us deciding to move back home. Now you may be watching this and thinking, hey, why not move to a different area? Why not move to a different part of Canada? Yes, Canada's massive. It's literally the second biggest country in the world. If we could have done that, we would have. How we saw it was, we are people who are qualified in film and TV work, and for me personally, not necessarily qualified in any other sort of profession. On our visas, we were on a working holiday visa, and we had to work in a skilled job that would have counted towards PR. And the permanent residency or PR process is it's a point-based system, and it needs to go down by points, and you need to get a certain amount of points to even be considered to be invited for permanent residency. And so if you are planning to stay in Canada, you want to be working in a job that will bring that in. You want to be working in a job that will give you those PR points so you can go forwards and live in Canada permanently. Now for us, we are working in film and TV. That was the profession we've been in for a couple of years now. For me, I've been in that profession for 10 years. That was what we wanted to do and what we wanted to pursue in Canada. So our jobs took us to Vancouver or to Toronto, and they don't necessarily translate to other parts of Canada, especially in different parts of BC. A lot of the film and TV jobs that we found were in the cities, and so you're going to be faced with different costs of living when you're going to work in the city. What I'm trying to say is we didn't have the luxury of being able to just up and move to somewhere much cheaper, somewhere much more remote, because our jobs weren't there and we didn't have the luxury of working from home. I wish we did. So facing that job situation of our jobs only seem to exist in the cities, that is why we moved to Vancouver. And because Vancouver decorates itself and promotes itself as being Hollywood North. So all the research we did was like, hey, there's going to be so much film work here, a lot more opportunities than there would be back in the UK. And we were like, yes, no brainer. We will go over there and we'll get work. I got work. If you watch my other videos, you've seen that I got work, which was fantastic. I started off working for an animation company, working on a Disney program, and then I ended up working in news again, which is something I didn't want to do, but I did it. And my partner didn't find any work. And again, the work that he applied for was skilled work. He had loads of interviews. He sent off hundreds of applications. Nothing, no job came through. So we can plan for that. We can plan for him not finding the work. And that leads me kind of on to the other factor of things is we can plan for only my income coming in, and that was hard. That was hard to live with. It kind of ties in with the cost of living because Vancouver was very expensive. It's expensive to buy groceries there. It's expensive to find cheap rentals, and it was hard. It was hard to live there. So only my income, no work on my partner's side. That was a very, very strange situation to be in, and it was kind of stacked against us. Now, I've had a couple of people commenting saying people shouldn't listen to your advice because you are lying, or it doesn't make sense, or nobody else has had that experience, or they haven't personally had that experience. Never have I said you should listen to me and take it as gospel. I'm just sharing my own experience, and this is part of my experience. So it's great if you've had a great experience, but we didn't necessarily have a great experience. So bear that in mind when you're watching these videos. Can't believe I even have to make that a disclaimer. The cost of living was very hard, and I was living in the city, and yes, Vancouver is expensive, but again, I've told you, we didn't have the luxury of moving further out because our jobs were in the city. When you're just going to a brand new place, you kind of want to get your bearings. So our plan was to live in downtown for a year and then move out to the city. But we were faced with not being able to afford a car, not being able to put any money aside at the end of the month. We were faced with expensive groceries, expensive rent, taxes and fees. It was just a lot, and it was hard for me to save that on just my salary. So I couldn't go out and afford a car, and that would have really helped if I had been able to find a car. I could have moved further out, but then I would have been facing an hour or so commute. You're going to get people who don't agree with that, fine, but all the research I did, and even when I was looking to stay for another year, I couldn't find anything within our budget. We also had the difficulty of living in Vancouver with rental restrictions on how many pets you've got, and we had 3 cats, and so we weren't willing to give up the cats. So we couldn't find a rental that was within budget that would accept us and the 3 cats. If you're going to Vancouver and you don't mind sharing with people and you're not tied down with pets or anything like that, or even if you're single, you're probably going to have a better experience. But for us, we lived together. We had 3 cats. We weren't willing to share because why should we? We didn't want to do that. And that was it. So this is why we were faced with our decision to move back. Another reason that we decided to move back to the UK was my partner's mental health. So you imagine you've gone to a brand new place. Yes, he was homesick and he faced homesickness a lot more than I did. And also just not having any work really had a negative impact on him because he didn't get an authentic experience, an experience that neither of us thought we'd have. Not having a second income was hard, but not being able to work for a year was even harder. He did some remote work for clients back home in the UK, but it wasn't nearly enough to keep us afloat and sustain us and to help towards like a permanent residency application was a big factor. I was living with somebody who wasn't the happiest and wasn't entirely happy with the situation that we were in. And there was lots of discussions around what we could do to fix it and what we could do to stay. And we just kept going back and forth. We'd have a really good patch of thinking we were going to stay, and then we were back to wanting to go back home. Typically, when it was too late to change our plans, our flights were booked, the cat's flights were booked, and it was ready to go. My partner wanted to stay, but we couldn't do it. We had to leave, and we left. I had given up my job, and I couldn't get my job back, and it was all that sort of stuff going on. So it was difficult, and I think that's something that isn't necessarily considered when people are moving abroad. Is the homesickness can be hard. I was lucky that it didn't really hit me as much, but it can be difficult. It can take a while for you to adjust, and your mental health can be negatively impacted by your experience and an adjustment period, because you're not going to know how you're going to cope until you're there and how you experience that sort of stuff. You've got a hardship of living in a place that's very expensive, and also a hardship of a relationship with somebody and how they're feeling about things and how you approach that situation and how you deal with that situation. So there was a lot of personal things going on around that too. And one thing I remember saying to my partner was, even though I want to stay and would stay, you don't want to. So either way, whatever we decide to do, one of us won't be necessarily the happiest. I just knew that I would be okay moving back to the UK and I could deal with it. And I wouldn't mind as much. So I just basically said, you know, we'll do what you think is right. And up until, like I say, up until we were ready to go, my partner was ready to go. And then he wanted to stay, and by that point it was too late. So he's had a bit of a learning curve, and I think that will be very beneficial to him going forwards too. But you can't factor for these things until you're faced with them, and you have to deal with the situation as it approaches you and how you feel is best. And for us, it felt like the right thing to do was moving back to the UK. Another reason we decided to move back to the UK was because of the permanent residency application process. So that was our plan initially, is we were going to move to Canada and apply for permanent residency straight away and get the ball rolling on that. That didn't happen because you can't plan for these things, and we were kind of going back and forth on what we wanted to do. But when we eventually decided to go and do our application process, we had some things to consider. So I had 1 year of Canadian work experience, and for the permanent residency application, Canadian work experience is so valuable and so important to have, especially if it's in the skilled list, which is the NOC codes. And I'm not going to go into the details around that, but mine was in there and it was a highish one. So I got good points for that. However, I didn't have my English degree, my BA honorary degree. So my education level let me down. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is our initial plan was my partner would go because he's got a degree, and I would go on his application because he would get skilled work, and then I would have my skilled work and I would finish my degree and we would have lots of points and we'd probably be invited. That didn't happen. So we had that to contend with and had that to kind of deliberate on. We have to do an English language test. Everyone has to do it because it kind of evens the playing field. But I mean, we're British and we had to do an English language test. So there's a little bit of a irony to that, but I completely understand why we have to do it. We went to do that, and my partner is dyslexic and he didn't get a lot of points. He got an average of 7, I believe it was, and I got an average of 8. And we spoke to an immigration person and he would only get a couple of other points, but because he didn't get Canadian work experience and his English language results were a little bit lower, we didn't get all that many points. We got about 300 and something points. We were wondering why it was so low, because you can go online, you can do a calculator, and you can put in all your details to see your average predicted results. And lately, I think quite often the pool gets drawn for these points, and you need around 480, 490 points to be eligible for permanent residency, to be invited to apply for permanent residency. We were below that on 300 something. We were on 300 something because my partner brought it down because of no work experience, which wasn't going to be the plan originally. But again, you can't plan for these things. But we were wondering why it was so wrong and why it seemed to be so low. And the reason it was low was because when we applied, we didn't get our credentials, our education credentials, validated for the Canadian market, which is something you've got to do. Now, we were under the impression that we wouldn't have to do that until we were actually invited to apply. So we went in, did our application, and to the Canadian government in the pool, it looks like neither of us have got an education. My partner's got a BA degree and I've got a foundation degree. So what we've now decided to do is put our application in to get our degrees and our certificates validated, which will hopefully boost the points up to the 400 something mark. It's not guaranteed though that if you do reach those points that you are actually going to be invited to apply, but at least you have a bit of a better chance to do that. But because of that, because we saw our points were so low, my employer wouldn't help with my application, so I was immediately not eligible for a stream where your employer helps you and sponsors you. That was a big thing to consider, because we were thinking, well, we could stay another year, but we're still probably not going to reach the right amount of points, and we probably still won't be invited to apply. And so we thought, well, we're going to be here for another year, and then maybe at the end of that year, when we definitely know we want to stay, we're actually going to be thinking, actually, we can't stay because we might not be invited. And because we're in this situation right now where both of us are kind of thinking, do we need to retrain? Do we need to do something a little bit differently with our careers? We decided that maybe the smartest thing to do was to do that where we have that safety net back home. But here's why I say that I don't necessarily at this moment in time think I will stay in the UK, and things change all the time. Like I said in the earlier video, I'm in the area of just rolling with it, seeing what happens. I'm not planning anything, just go with the flow, chill out for a little bit and see what comes. But just being here again was exactly what I knew it would be. My argument for moving back home was I always remembered why I wanted to move from the UK and why I didn't want to stay in the UK. But I had that in my mind, and even when Vancouver was tough, and even when I was thinking, oh my God, I had a better quality of life in the UK, which I did. I had a much better quality of life before I moved to Vancouver, if that makes sense. My life in the UK was great, it was fine. When I was in Vancouver, yeah, I was thinking to myself, I had a lot better life in the UK because I could afford things better. And yeah, the argument is that here in the UK, the cost has risen, which it has. However, I would say that still, even though things have risen, food is still so much more cheaper than Vancouver. You can still afford a lot more with your money on a lot less. But that's an argument for another time. And even though Vancouver was hard, I was more than prepared to see if we could move somewhere different, see if we could try a different part of Canada, and have those discussions. When I got back, I wasn't sad. I didn't necessarily feel sad about leaving Vancouver. I still don't necessarily feel sad about leaving Vancouver. I don't really miss Vancouver. There's people I miss, there's things I miss, like little things I miss, but I don't like grieve for Vancouver at all. But I've been in the UK now for around 20 days or so, I guess, and I've actually been very busy with life back in the UK. And this is coming back from Liverpool, and I was just in Liverpool for the weekend for Eurovision. And just being back in like UK culture and being back in UK cities and seeing more of the UK than just this little perfect bit of Wales that I'm in right now, it just reminded me of why I left. Again, there was just a couple of things that I was just kind of like, yeah, like this isn't for me. I don't see myself in the UK. I don't really necessarily feel like the UK is for me. It's just not for me. And I would gladly move somewhere else straight away. If somebody said to me, hey, you've got this visa for this place, let's go, within reason, I would be like, yeah, okay, sure, I'm going. I just remembered why I left, and I had that suspicion confirmed. There is just stagnant wages in the UK. It's just the jobs I've been lucky. I've got 2 jobs at the minute, and I took 2 jobs on because I wanted to, not because I had to, just because I wanted to. I was really lucky as well that my industry, for the area I've moved to, that job existed in my area. I was really lucky with that and I got it. I can now actually call myself a journalist and a reporter. I'm actually starting a job as a reporter and a journalist, which is something I've wanted to do for years. Literally for years I've wanted to be a journalist. So I'm happy about that I'm now a journalist. I also work at a bookshop now, which is great. It's kind of like, a little like a box tick, like, yes, I can say I've done this now, and I'm just looking forward to working in a bookshop for a little bit because I think it's fun. So I've got these 2 jobs, but I will say that the wages, they aren't great. And when I've looked at other jobs around the UK, yes, Canada pays a lot more, which is great if you can afford to live there. But still, Canada and Australia, they do pay a lot better than the UK. UK wages they just ain't cutting it. They're just not good. And so many people at the minute are protesting around, their wages and kind of their quality of life because of the cost of living crisis that the UK is facing, and because of the hours they give and how much little they get back in return. And so there's a lot of anger around a working environment here. I ended up doing the same job in Canada that I did back home in the UK, and had the most money I ever had. It was the most money I'd ever been earning. It was 64k Canadian dollars, and originally I was on 30k in the same job. 30k was great. Here in the UK, I was able to afford a lot of things on 30k, and I couldn't actually afford all that much on 64k in Canada, in Vancouver at least. So, you weigh that up, but definitely if you have the luxury of moving to a different part of Canada on that same wage, you're probably going to have better quality of life because you'll be able to afford a little bit more. Being back in the UK, I do have that feeling that there are just a lack of opportunities again. And that may be just a mindset thing, but I definitely feel when I was in Vancouver, even though I was struggling to live, I saw a lot more opportunities and ways to kind of make money and get a career that I wanted. Here, I don't see that as readily available, and that's probably because I was more in a city and kind of there were more things going on, whereas my life in Wales, I've never been around that really, and you kind of have to see that in places like London. Sure, they exist in other sort of cities, but I always found that like you needed to move somewhere completely different from Wales in the UK. But yeah, I just feel like there are just a lack of growth opportunities and a lack of things to kind of take advantage of. Another thing I think we realized when we were living in Vancouver, like I said about our careers, I think we just weren't quite ready for Canada career-wise. I want to retrain, I want to do something a little bit different, and it seemed a bit harder to do that in Canada, in Vancouver at least, and it was a very risky thing to do. We have a safety net back in the UK, and that is something we didn't have back home. We've got a support network back home in the UK, so we had all these things to consider, and we can kind of go very slowly now at working towards what we can plan to do and what we want to do, and exploring other options and seeing what's available to us. This is the thing, for both things, I will never regret moving to Canada, and I also don't regret moving back to the UK. I just know that I needed to move back to the UK, and I think my partner needed to move back to the UK to realise that it wasn't quite what we wanted. And when you're abroad, and when we were sat in Vancouver kind of struggling, we would see good things happening in the UK and think about the good things we had back in the UK and think, hey, we had a good thing going. Even though that doubt was still there on the reason why we left and the hope that we could still make Canada work, we knew we had to do something and we decided to move back. But I think it's helped us both kind of reevaluate our own lives, what we want, and check things of what we want, and go from there and kind of let the ball roll and see what comes from it. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. The good thing about it is I've got 1 year of Canadian work experience, which is so valuable for the permanent residency application process. I'm going to finish my degree, which will also help boost our points. So we've got all this good things going for us, and the opportunity is still there to pursue that, as well as other opportunities, possibly looking to move to somewhere like Australia. So we're having discussions about what we can possibly do and what is available to us and what we want to explore. And we're just going to kind of see how it goes and see what happens from there, and see if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen, it wasn't meant to be. If it happens, then it happens and it was meant to be. Another reason why we are thinking about possibly not staying in the UK is because of we've come back a year later, and it's only a year later, but a lot has changed. Things have changed here. Not necessarily with the cost of living, though things are a little bit more pricier here, but more so in the sense that both of us kind of feel a little bit different than we felt before we left the UK. And I think that's because we've experienced a different way of life and seen a different way of living, and had sort of, even though we didn't feel like we did all that much because we couldn't afford that much, we just adapted to a different lifestyle and a Canadian sort of way of life, which isn't reflected in the UK naturally because it's the UK. And also, no shade to anyone in my family, my friends, anything like that. But we came back and everyone's just kind of still doing the same thing, still kind of living their day-to-day routine lives and doing the same sort of, nothing's really changed for them. And you feel like you've gone through a change. You feel like you've gone through a growth period. You feel like you've just done something a bit different. And all of a sudden it doesn't necessarily, you feel a little bit disconnected. And again, that's just a completely kind of personal thing and a mindset thing. And it's kind of self-imposed, but you feel like you've lost a connection. You feel like you've lost a connection to something and someone and people, and it's weird. It's a weird feeling. It feels like kind of you've done something and you don't quite fit anymore. That kind of sums up this video on why I decided to move back to the UK and why I might actually move somewhere different. I hope it makes sense. There's probably things I'm going to think about and think, oh, maybe I should have mentioned that. So if you think of something or you want something clarified, comment below and let me know. Please don't tell me that my experiences are wrong, or that, you know, that because you've had a good experience, it means that I haven't. Like, I'm sharing my own personal experience and our own decision making. just because you don't think it's right or you think I've done something wrong, I don't really necessarily want to hear that because I had to do what was right for us. So I did that. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you kind of can see this and kind of understand things. And I hope you kind of stick with it and stick with us and stick with me to kind of see what we decide to do and what comes next, because it's exciting and it's fun. And I'm going to be sharing more content around just daily life in the UK and around books and hopefully around my jobs and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to kind of doing things a little bit differently and embracing a different way of life, if only for a temporary amount of time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.